Okay, I suggest we get started now because we've got a fairly tight schedule for today's session. So welcome along. It's really nice to see so many people and so many familiar faces actually here at this PCST webinar. My name's Dr. Andy Ridgway. I'm a senior lecturer in science communication at the University of the West of England in the UK. And today I'm going to be chairing this session, which is organised by the PCST Teaching Forum. And my fellow organisers, Dr. Frans van Dam is here, and Dr. Melanie Smallman is here as well. And this session is really going to look at AI in science communication and the implications for teaching practice. So for many of us who teach in science communication, and I can see from who's here, many people work in science communication practice as well. AI is a source of intrigue in terms of what it might be able to offer, its potential. But I'm sure it's also a source of concern in terms of the implications of what it might replace in terms of our day-to-day work. And what new skills we might need to adopt as science communicators to make the most of the potential that AI offers. But it also presents some quite significant ethical challenges about where the data is held, the accuracy of the information that it generates and the outputs that it generates, and also equality of access and equality within the information that it provides as a result of the prompts that we give it. So this session is one of two where we'll be looking at AI. So the second is in September, where we'll look at more the sort of ethical societal issues presented by AI in science communication. But in this first one, we're really going to focus on the practice of science communication. So we've assembled three speakers, literally from around the world. That's not an exaggeration. Who have different perspectives on science communication and AI. So our first speaker today will be Shavi Sajdev, who is a podcast producer and editor and also a radio journalist, and she's based in Mumbai, India. And her clients include BBC World Service and Deloitte India. Our second speaker is Tullio Rossi, who has a PhD in marine biology and is founder of Animate Your Science, which does animation and graphic design for researchers, but also science communication training. And then our third speaker is Jeff Goods, who is currently a journalist in residence at McMaster's Faculty of Science in Ontario, Canada. And he's a former CBC producer and journalist. Yeah, he will be giving his perspective on AI as well. So our first two speakers are going to be talking about how they use AI in their work, hopefully to give you some insights with your own work, but also thoughts on what the sorts of skills we should be teaching our students in future in science communication. And then Jeff will be providing something of a counterpoint, really, how science communicators of the future might be able to have a USP and future-proof themselves against the abilities of AI. So we've got fairly limited time today. What I propose to do is I'll hand over to our first speakers, Shavi. So whenever you're ready, over to you.
Right. Hi. I am going to be talking to you about podcasting with AI. My name is Chavi. I am a podcast producer, as Andy says, but I'm also a science communicator in that I am a journalist. And mostly I do science journalism when I do journalism. And these are most of the audio and radio and podcast places that I make programs for, usually trying to communicate pretty complex science things and make them interesting and accessible. So today we've got actually less than 10 minutes to talk about why podcasts for science communicators is a good idea, a great idea, how to podcast, the equipment and tools that I use, and also whether AI can step in and help. And three, what makes a podcast a podcast? And this is an existential question about whether AI can step in and be a podcaster as we are. So jumping right in, I don't know if we can do this here, but maybe there's a way to do a show of hands in chat. If you could put in a Y, if you already know what a podcast is and you listen to podcasts or have even made a podcast. Like if you're familiar with podcasts, just put in a Y if it's a yes. Okay, super. So maybe I don't need to explain what a podcast is. For the purposes of this talk, though, we are going to focus on audio podcasts. I'm not going to talk about what is being done as talk shows in studios with people recording video. We're going to talk about on-demand audio that you can listen to wherever in the world you are, on whatever device you want, that is communicating only through voice. So why podcasts? Here's why I got into them and why I find them really effective communication tools. So one is that they are generally really immediate. Podcasts are a solitary exercise. You probably listen to them with earphones on, but not in a community setting. If you're in a car with people, you're generally not listening to a podcast, but you are listening to something that is speaking directly to you in your ears. And I personally absolutely love that. It's also usually in the best way authentic, because you're hearing voices that are actually the authors, the ideators that are putting forward their own thoughts and their own discoveries, inventions, attitudes, beliefs, and we're giving them a voice. These are people that mainstream media may be ignoring or just not caring about, especially when it comes to important science. We're often sidelined. So podcasts can give literal voice to somebody who is a very niche. They're also low cost, so that makes them easy to make, especially compared with video. And they're accessible by a huge variety of people. You're not restricted by geography or time zones. Pretty much everybody, like in India, almost everybody has a mobile phone with data. Give them a podcast, they can listen wherever they are. And finally, I think they're really, really useful because they're consumable. They're usually like you can do other things while you are listening, and they provide information that cuts through the clutter. It's a pull medium. So people are generally looking for your podcast, seeking it out, and then choosing to listen to it as opposed to some sort of a passive media thing that is just sent out and that people can gloss over. So podcasts can be very, very influential tools for communicating good ideas, attitude changes, inventions, discoveries, things that matter. So whether you're a science communicator or a teacher for people who are going to become science communicators, I champion podcasts. I'm not biased at all. And I feel like they're really, really great tools for science communication. So I want to just quickly go over what I do when I'm making a podcast. And again, we're talking only about audio. So the cool, fun stuff is actually only about 20% of the entire process. There's a lot of pre-process, which is planning, making sure that you have a plan. You know what you want to say, what you want to communicate. There's a mission, if you want, and a vision for what you're putting out and why, what ideas you want the listener to receive and how. So all of that determines whether you're going to just do an interview, you're going to do a monologue and share information, or you're going to do features, which is actually what I specialize in, which means you take multiple narratives, piece it together, and it's the most difficult and time consuming, but you piece it together to make a very rich, layered story to explain ideas. If we have time later, I can share some audio. Right now, I'm just going to talk. So you have to do all this preparation before you start recording. I wish I could say that it's as easy as opening your phone recording app, hitting record, talking into it, and then sending it off into the cloud and assuming people will come and listen and they'll be captivated and enthralled by it. Unfortunately, it's a lot more work if you want to make a podcast that is worth listening to. So if you're doing something like an interview podcast or a panel or a feature, you generally want somebody else to join you who is going to share data, scientific information, maybe more than one person. Then you want to also set up those recordings because you want their voice on it. And you want to have an idea of what you're getting into, whether you share it with them or you're just going into it as a surprise for your interlocutor, but you want to generally have a script, questions that you're going to ask, a flow, where you're going to start, where you're going to end up, where are you taking your listener on a journey of discovery and hopefully delight. Then you come to audio, which is you have to record it, and whether it's an interview or not, you can do it in person, you can do it over the internet. And then eventually you want to make it sound like a whole. And I advise, and I generally practice making the intro and the outro later so that it sounds like a well thought out, complete start to finish product. And then you really should edit it. So you mix master, you take out all the ums, ahs, maybe some superfluous chatter, you tighten it, and you don't just send it out into the wild by itself, you massage it slightly. And then you have to put it out into the world, which means you have to put it online onto a hosting platform and then tell people it exists, which means you have to, in this day and age, leverage social media, newsletters, put the word out. So all this is a lot of work. And I understand it can be daunting for people. So we can start using AI. And AI can now, I looked online, can do so much. You can generate scripts. You can even have AI voices do stuff. You can have a parrot mode, which tells AI voices how to sound. You can sound like Gwyneth Paltrow or Snoop Dogg or whoever you want. But I have to ask, like, what is the cost? And I think what you lose is the fun. This is how you want to learn. You want to record. You want to be present. You want people to come in and be part of your story. Learn new skills, learn how to do stuff. And even if you can't go and use those, you can still do this over IP. So these are some of the tools. I think Franz or Andy will share these lists. This is one of the most painful parts of the process for me, which is editing audio. And I actually use this as a quick AI tool, which lets you edit down audio through a transcription. So you can actually select words that you can see and you can cut them and they will disappear in the audio. There are a couple of tools that do this. There's a list that we'll share with you. You can also generate questions, potential questions and details from a tool like ChatGPT to do your background for you. They can research a person and tell you what to focus on. You can get show notes done through AI. And you can also make audiograms, which are small shareable video clips you can put online through social media. There are a bunch of tools that do this. There's a whole show flow that we'll send you that you can follow if you really want to outsource it. But I would argue that what makes a podcast is the person who hosts it, the passion, the stories, the fact that your humor will come through. And so if you're a practitioner or a teacher, I would say ask your students, think about authenticity, accessibility, sounding like a human being, sounding like someone with ideas, thoughts, opinions, and getting happy about what you do. All that AI cannot do. And you have to weed out the deep fakes and really, really cultivate this persona, because as a host, you are going to be leading your listeners through. You are their anchor, and you want to bring them back because they like you, they trust you, and you're communicating thoughts and ideas that nobody else can. And even AI really can only sort of replicate or mimic at best. So I don't know how we are for time.
Great. I think we're up for time. That was terrific. Thanks, Xavi. So maybe a virtual round of applause for Xavi. Thank you ever so much. So yeah, we've got a bit of time for questions now. Feel free to tap any questions you have into the chat. But also what I'd rather is if you're happy to put your hand up, we'll try and come to you, and it'd be great if you could sort of say your question out loud. So we've got a bit of time for questions after each speaker, and then hopefully we'll have a bit more time for sort of a general discussion at the end as well, and some further questions. So Melanie, I see that you've got your hand up, so feel free to ask away.
Yeah, hi, thanks. That was really interesting. I think what would be super helpful for me to know is, I know that you could use AI but do you use AI, and is using it a skill that we should be teaching students, or should we be telling them to steer away from it? And if it is a skill, what specifically should we be teaching them to do?
I do use AI. I use it for transcription, translation. I use it to do the mundane things that I find hard to do, but I'm not outsourcing my brain to it. So if I were teaching this, I would tell people what the options are, like the tools for editing. Everybody doesn't want to become an audio editor and spend time doing tutorials online on how to cut sound waves. So perhaps for somebody like that, using a tool that can help you edit audio through text is great, time-saving and easy. For me, transcription, because I do a lot of features, I need what we call timestamps. I want to go into the audio and quickly find the very relevant clip. So a transcript, which is easier to skim rather than listening back in real time to audio, makes my life simpler. So I upload the audio into a transcription tool. It gives me timestamps, so I can be like, oh, from 31 seconds to 1 minute 42 seconds, this is the clip I want to play. And to me, that is a huge time saver. Same for making social media posts. I'm terrible at that. I'm a journalist at heart. I'm not good at marketing. So I'm happy to outsource that bit, but I would obviously choose to be cautious and use it as an aid, not a substitute.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Xavi. Are there any other questions?
I have a question.
Great, thanks, Franz.
Yeah, I was wondering, thanks, Xavi, for this talk. I was wondering, does AI add some creativity to your work, or does it also take away some of the creative process? That's my first question. The second question is, you mainly talked about what it brings you as a podcast producer, but what could AI bring the listeners, to the users of podcast?
For creativity, I have not leaned on AI. I trust my instinct and the things I know about science better. In fact, AI can't do the things I do with podcasting. And if we have time, I can play you a clip of what we've managed to do with audio for podcasting specifically that helps communicate or bring alive what could be dull and boring science. I'm sorry, what was your second question? I got so carried away with my own answer.
Well, I had two questions. One was about creativity, and the other question, I think I forgot. Somebody else, Andy, do you remember?
Oops.
Oops.
What it brings to the listeners, I think.
What does it bring? Yeah. Thanks, Mark. What does it bring to? What does it bring for the listeners? What's the added value for the listeners?
For the listeners, I don't know. I mean, if it's done right, it should be seamless. And when people use cultivated voices, I feel like it's a disservice to the listener. I wonder if I could talk about what it could do for the person or the scientist who's hopefully being spotlighted. And I feel like for doing that, AI could be a tool for the interviewer in helping us think outside the box or investigate what has already been covered and find a fresh angle to talk about something that they have not talked about before. Perhaps. If we have time, I'm happy to play you some audio.
Terrific, thanks, Xavi. And what I suggest, because we're quite tight for time, is that we perhaps move on to the next speaker, because there will be time for further questions at the end of the session, and it may be that there are other questions that people have for you and then the other speakers as well at that time. So, Tulio, let's hand over the floor to you.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here and great to see so many familiar names in the long list of attendees today. So let me quickly share my slides and we'll get started, because Andy said it's going to be very strict with the 8 minutes and I don't want to upset him. Okay, so you should be able to see my slides now. Let me just drag this over. All right, excellent. So many of you are into teaching science communication. So wouldn't you want one day to see one of your students in The Guardian, on Vice, and even on the Late Show of Stephen Colbert, one of my favorite American comedian? Wouldn't it be amazing? Well, there's a right way, you can go on these platforms because you've done something good or because you've done something bad. And this is what happened to a scientist that used artificial intelligence to create figures for its paper. And the figure it created and submitted to a journal was so outrageous that it got downloaded 200,000 times in 2 days. So it was the most popular paper of the journal instantly for all the wrong reasons. As you can see, everything in this image is wrong and outrageous. We're literally looking at a rat with giant genitals hanging from the ceiling. And this somehow passed peer review. It was published in one of the frontiers journals, and the authors are Chinese. We don't know anything about them, but one of the reviewers was from the US and said, well, it's not my job to check the figures. So this is how you use AI wrong. Clearly, we don't want to do that. We don't want articles of this kind talking about our work, but is there a better way? Well, I'll give you a bit of background about myself. As earlier Andy mentioned, I've united graphic design and science to create this agency. A lot of what we do is create artwork and animations. And last year, I had a solid month of panic thinking, oh my God, AI is going to wipe us out. And eventually I got over it, and now I'm a lot more relaxed about it. And you'll soon understand why. So we've all seen these AI-generated images. They're great to have a bit of a laugh. Clearly, none of these are real. The Pope doesn't have that really cool jacket and has never been seen ripping the dance floor, unfortunately. But is AI useful for anything more serious, such as science communication? And I will say yes, for some things, not for others. I found it great for conceptual work. And I give you probably the best example I was able to create. What we're looking here is a slime castle. My wife is a microbiologist working on biofilms. And so I prompted DALL-E, which is the image generating AI within ChatGPT. And I said, illustrate a biofilm castle where bacteria are protected by the assault of the immune system and antibiotic. And the output is brilliant. I love it. It's so fun. The bacteria are clearly not realistic, but they're cute. They have faces. They look like monsters. The slime on the walls is brilliant. It's really, really good. I was blown away by this output. So for stuff like this, where accuracy doesn't matter because you're working with an analogy here, it's all good. AI can be useful. And it can also be useful if what you're communicating is something fairly simple. It can be simple objects, humans, and simple animals, like dogs and cats, or simple scenes. And we managed to make one video so far where we used only AI-generated artwork. And I selected this video because it was about seabirds, so fairly simple subject. We were not talking about complex molecular biology things. It was pretty straightforward. It was just black seabird being impacted by plastic pollution. I want to share with you a very short piece of that video so you can get an idea. The artwork is AI generated. The animation is very much human generated.
Imagine being born under a sky you've never seen, in a burrow on an isolated island. Meet Luna, our young and aspiring shearwater chick. At 90 days old, she emerges from her burrow for the first time, locking eyes with the stars and the vast ocean. A world so alien, yet so compelling.
Okay, so what we're looking at here, some really nice illustrated scenes, watercolor style. It was feasible in this case, but still took a lot of attempts and a lot of frustration, because sometimes you have an idea in mind and you try to get the AI to create it, and there's just no way. It will not do what you want. So you need to approach it with a very open mind. This is still, as of right now, the only video where we've used AI. Because of the limitations I'm about to talk about. So we're in the business of science communication. We're teaching science communication. Accuracy matters. Accuracy is non-negotiable for us. And here is where things start to break. When I prompted the AI to create the DNA double helix, it created this very weird looking one on the left, which is clearly wrong in many, many ways. And then when I prompted it for a bacterial cell cross-section, it created something that at first glance, it might look all right. But then as you look closer and if you understand biology, you realize that this is just random bean-looking organelles and things that look like olives that should not be there. So it's an approximation, but it's not the real thing. And this is the issue. And also you'll find, if you try to use it to create something you have in mind, that it has no concept of physics. And so here, for example, they needed an image for a PowerPoint presentation of a truck dumping a pile of research papers. And this is what it made. So I said, no, the papers need to come out from the back. And so it did it again. Yeah, sure, here it is. And I was like, no, it's still wrong. And it did it again, even worse. So clearly it's not that easy to get it to do what you have in mind. And then there's the other big problem with AI that is in the West. We're going in the direction that the output of AI is public domain. So the act of prompting the AI is not enough to entitle you of the ownership of the output. The output is automatically public domain, which has implications for an agency like ours doing client work. We work by making things we initially own as the creators, and then we sell that copyright to the client. If what we create is public domain, you see that everything starts to fall apart. Interestingly, China is going in the opposite direction in regards to copyright. So it's really messy. It's very much a gray area. And, I'm struck with time, so I'll leave it at that. So my message is AI will not replace scientific illustrators, but I think it will enhance their capabilities. And I think the key to stay in the loop and to use AI as a tool, as a sidekick in a way that makes you still very much part of the creative process, which is what you want, because as a creative, you don't want to just delegate your whole job to the AI, and then why do you do it? And even, why do you bother doing it? It's not fun anymore. It's not gratifying anymore. So I think the future is in this co-creation. And here I want to show you a quick example of what that can look like. So here we're looking on the left, the input of the user in a tool that's called Crea AI. And on the right is what the AI is interpreting. And then there's also a written prompt. So this is mixing the written prompt with a sketch. And then that sketch can be refined. You can add to it. You can add pictures. You can have icons or whatever. Or if you're good at drawing, you can simply draw with freehand. So this is a good way to co-create, which will definitely give you more control over the output. And I think here's where I think things are going to go in the creative industry. However, when it comes to science communication, there are still issues. Because I tried this tool yesterday, and I tried to get it to do bacteria, but there was no way. What it created was just plain wrong. It was not able to interpret my prompt at all. So I think this is where things are going, but it's still early. And we've all seen how quickly the ChatGPT in terms of text production has improved. Image generation is behind, and video generation is even more behind. How long that will take to become useful, I don't know, but I think the future is in co-creation with AI, definitely not in replacing us. And so this is my final message: to embrace it, co-create with it, and avoid the pitfalls. Don't end up in the news for the wrong reasons and ruin your career as a result. Thank you all for the attention.
Terrific. Thanks ever so much, Tulio. That was wonderful. I'm sure that will prompt lots of questions. I know I certainly have quite a few questions from that. But Mark Boss, I see that you've asked a question in the chat. I wondered if you'd be happy to sort of say it out loud. It looks like it's about sort of prompt questions and sort of writing those effectively.
Yeah, sure, Andy. Thanks for the floor. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting and nice to see all the examples. Amazing to see what already can be done, even if it's not always top notch. But I was wondering whether or not you played around with prompting strategies. I read a lot of things on the internet about the influence on how you formulate the instructions and how elaborate the prompt can be for the AI. And the example that you gave was essentially a quite simplistic prompt. So I was just wondering whether or not you tested this and to what extent it becomes better.
Yes, I have spent some time with Midjourney, which is probably the best image generator out there at the moment. What I found is that, yes, with the more detailed prompt, you have more creative control over the style. However, it still fails when it comes to getting exactly what you need. So I find it's great for things. Let's say you want to create a new background for your computer or a picture you want to hang on the wall, and accuracy is not a factor. Great, it will create really stunning stuff. But when it comes to science communication, accuracy is non-negotiable, and I cannot submit something wrong, anatomically wrong, or any other way wrong to a client. It's just not how it works. They come to us to have it exactly the correct way, the way it needs to be. And so that's where it breaks. Even if the prompt is detailed, that's where it starts to break. This is today, though. This technology is developing so fast that maybe in a year or two, all of what I'm saying will be solved. I don't know. I guess nobody really knows. We'll see. It's an interesting time to be alive, that's for sure.
Terrific. Thanks, Tulio. Franz, it looks like you've got a question as well.
Yes, thank you, Tulio. The previous person, Mark, and me, we teach a course in which we request our students to write a popular science article. So we teach them about writing. We also teach them a little bit about illustrating the article. So the article needs to go with about two illustrations. And right now we are considering how to instruct our students about this. So what would be your advice? Would you say let them make the illustrations themselves? So not using AI at the moment, or would you already advise them to play a little with several AI platforms for making these illustrations? What would be your advice?
I think not talking about it will be a disservice in the current day, given that it's so important something in any professional's life these days. But it's important to highlight the limitation. So a possible assignment could be maybe spot the AI generated image. So they develop some eye for fakes and for real images. And after you create a few AI generated images and you look at them closely, you start to notice patterns and you become quite good at spotting them. And then, I will give them a very detailed brief and say, try AI, try to do it yourself, see which one works. And in that process, they will discover themselves where the limitations are, and if they figure out a way to overcome them, bring it on. Why not? When things get specific and you need to follow a brief, that's when AI images start to be not so useful. If it's something general and conceptual, they're actually really good.
Terrific, thank you. I'm just conscious of time. I can see, Brendan, that you've got your hand up, and I don't want to sort of cut you off. So what I suggest is that we come to Jeff next and hear from him, and leave a bit of time for questions for Jeff as well. But I promise that we'll come to you, Brendan, before we finish with your question, because I'm really keen to hear from you. So Jeff, let's hear from you next.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm hoping that I can build on some of the great conversation that we've had so far between Xavi and Tulio. It's been really interesting. I'm going to come at it from a little bit of a different standpoint, and I've been thinking a lot about how as AI evolves, how we as science communicators will ultimately fit into the mix, and kind of not specifically, but more in a wide range. And so I'm going to propose that we do have a secret weapon that will be able to help us. And I'm going to start by bringing up an image, and then I'll share the screen. Share screen. There we go. There we go. Okay. So have you ever been in a situation where you've been listening to something on the radio or perhaps a podcast, and you've gotten to where you want to go, but you can't leave the car because you are so engaged in what you're listening to that you just can't leave? You're connected with the listener or with the speaker so much that whatever your whole trip brought you to, it suddenly becomes less important than what you're hearing on the radio. And that, to me, is the secret weapon of communicators, that opportunity to have that level of engagement. And I think that we should think about how we achieve that. And I think that sometimes as human beings, we underestimate our ability to make that connection and how it can be useful in the world of communications. Okay, so I'm going to, there we go. So I worked at the CBC for a few decades on all sorts of different shows, but the last show that I worked on was a medical show, and it was very popular here in Canada. It's called White Coat, Black Art. And one thing that we did with all our stories was that we wanted to make sure that every story had a head and a heartbeat. So we were very concerned about the idea of engaging the listener. And we knew oftentimes we had very valuable information to present that was relevant and important for people to hear. But we were also very cognizant of the fact that we needed to engage the listener on an emotional level. So we made sure that there was a very strong personal story in everything we did. And that personal story was our gateway to delivering information and our gateway to keeping people listening, hopefully in a car. So I was very interested in that idea. So I did a master's in learning and technology just a couple of years ago. I'm quite undereducated, really, and I did it on medical students and podcasting. So, Xavi, we have a lot in common. And I thought, the medical students, medical residents, actually, so there's such a great group to study because here, group that science communicators would love. They need to absorb a huge amount of information in a short period of time. They need to, they're so busy that podcasts are perfect for them. They can listen to them while they're doing grocery shopping, while they're cooking noodles, and they can listen to them at 1.5 speed. And they're just great tools for absorbing large swaths of information. But the interesting thing that I found really relevant and that I've taken away from that is that even though all those things are super important, the accessibility of information, the most important thing that came up over and over again was the human connection that people get from listening to a voice. And I was kind of struck by this, because I thought, there's such a practical reason for consuming information in this way, that to have the human connection bubble up to the top again and again and again really underscored the importance of why we need to focus on that. I remember interviewed one podcast host who works at the university here. He has a fairly successful podcast, and he was saying that people would come up to him at conferences and say, "Oh, it's so great to meet you. I feel like I know you," and that happens all the time. Another person talked about how they trusted the podcast host more than they trusted their in-classroom instructor. And this was just because they had this intimate relationship with them. So it underlines the importance of it and the power of it. There was some recent research from SiriusXM, which is a satellite radio and podcasting company here in North America. They were doing some research on different types of media and how trustworthy they are. The comparison that I was really struck by is like social media, which is obviously a hugely important way of conveying information. And they compared it to podcasting. And podcasting showed up as 23 times more trustworthy than social media, which how you can measure 23 times more trustworthy is a little spurious, but I mean, it's like, I was quite impressed by that. Anyway, so we have 2 minutes. And I wanted to highlight just before we end, as the journalists in residence at McMaster, we've been working a lot with how to use this type of engagement through voice, usually with podcasting, to engage people. And the advice I always give to people is that so many times as science communicators, we think about pushing our message out into the world and how to do that. And I always advise people to kind of stop for a minute and kind of turn that lens around and look at the audience and think about, okay, what do they need from us, and how can we engage them on a human level? And that's the way I think we can engage them. So I'll stop there, if that's okay, and throw it open for questions if anyone has any.
Terrific. Thanks ever so much, Jeff. That was wonderful. So do we have any questions from anybody? Feel free to tap them into the chat, or pop your hand up and we'll come to you and you can ask the question. So any questions for Jeff at all? I have a quick question, just while perhaps people are thinking. So one thing that I wanted to know is, I mean, you were describing there, I think really making a human connection. So can you give some examples of how that would manifest itself in a particular story, and particularly any reflections that you have on aspects of that AI perhaps couldn't replicate? So how, in other words, how we kind of keep our jobs as writers.
Yes. I think, we talked about the power of the human story. There's a couple other things that we do. There's the power of reaction, of interpretation, instead of just the facts. We have the power of making connections to different things and tangentially applying it to life. I'll give you an example. We just did a podcast. We were looking at how to create a podcast for prospective master students and research students who were thinking of coming to McMaster. So we wanted to talk about the research of some of the profs there, and we thought, okay, well that's fine, but how do we make that human connection? So we decided to create a podcast that kind of gamified it. So we created something called Moment, Mentor, Memento, and we brought the researchers in and we asked them about a moment that defined their research journey, a mentor who had a profound influence on them, and a memento, something that they bring with them wherever they go. So it was a way of structuring a research journey in a very personal way. So that's those ideas of combining head and heart is what I think is important.
Terrific, thank you. And I think there's a lovely comment, actually, you've probably not had a chance to see it yet, Jeff, in the chat from Marina Joubert, who says, I really love the idea that every story needs a head and a heart. And I think we humans hopefully still have an edge on AI in terms of adding the heart. So yeah, certainly, definitely. Franz, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for your talk. Very inspiring. I was just wondering if we would teach writing, especially writing, or either podcast messaging or writing or whatever communication tool to our students. What is it that we should hand to them? What is it that they need? Is it that they need, do they need to have the tools? So this is what AI can do to you, or the limitations of AI? Or is it more, if I listen to you, I have the feeling that it's more about self-confidence. So give them the confidence that they are still, that the human connection still has added value to, for instance, having AI write a script or an article. So where's the added value then of humans, and what should we do with our students? Especially
confidence is very important, Franz. I was thinking about that too, and also freedom, the freedom to be creative to the point where it's okay to make mistakes. You know, AI is very controlled, and and the messy business of creativity is often very scary for students, because to take creative risks, they risk failure. So I think we have to create an environment where people are able to explore new ways of bringing the humanity to the story, and that can be like that's messy and doesn't always work. So that's one of it, one thing. And I think AI can be very helpful in terms of, you know, if to rough out a first draft, or to overcome kind of blank page syndrome, which is so tough for young writers. And so if we give them the confidence to say, okay, this is kind of the clay that you can work with, but we need to take it to another level to make it human. Maybe give them that task.
Terrific, thanks, Jeff. So if you've not already seen it, Xavi has just popped in the chat some lovely suggestions of specific tools that you might want to use for AI, or perhaps introduce your students to. So yeah, thank you for that. That's lots of food for thought there, Xavi. So we've got a bit of time now for some questions. So as promised, Brendan, let's hear from you. I mean, it's questions for anybody, any of our speakers who've talked to us today. So Tulio, Xavi, and Jeff. But Brendan, yeah, over to you.
Thanks. Yes. So question for Tulio. Thanks for the presentation, Tulio, and learned a lot about some of the applications for video. So I'm interested to know from you, like you mentioned in your presentation, these tools are being updated all the time and so quickly. We've just seen some of the big updates to ChatGPT, for instance. So some of the science communicators that I speak to tell me they're sort of keeping their head in the sand at the moment because they feel a bit overwhelmed by this explosion of AI. I don't think that's a viable response for the moment. So I want to know any advice you have, Tulio, for people getting into the AI tools. How do we keep track of what's going on, keep on top of things, but do so in a way that stops us from being overwhelmed by all these possible tools and sort of flashing lights that are out there with the AI stuff?
You need a full-time employee to test them all and tell you what the good ones are. There are hundreds being published every day. It's the startup creation rate has exploded still since AI. Look, I'm part of a business school here in Australia, and they do have a full-time person testing tech tools. And then at every conference, 4 times a year, they give us the digest of the top 15 or 20 we should bother looking at to implement in our business. So it is a lot of work and it is overwhelming. I myself, I found us probably spend more time on it than I should have. But at the same time, I'm now in this situation where I realize that I know about this stuff a bit more than most, and so I can help others to catch up. So, for example, in a couple of weeks, I'm giving a first half-day workshop in AI for research, communication. I will go deep into prompting and image creation and all the aspects. But yeah, there's no easy answer, unfortunately, to your question. It is hard. And I think, yes, putting the head under the sand is not an option. And people that do that will pay the consequences, because I do believe in the saying that AI will not replace you, but a person using AI might replace you. So I think you do want to be that person that is a bit tech savvy and gets that extra productivity boost. So in a way, enhanced their capacity thanks to AI. Because the alternative is quite dire. And then who knows, maybe in 10 years, we're all out of a job and we'll be in the post-labor economy. And look, I look forward to that.
Terrific. Thanks, Tulio. Are there any other questions from the floor? Feel free to pop your hand up or tap a question into chat. So I have a quick question just to sort of jump in. Prompted by that, I think that's our quote of the day so far. AI may not replace you, but a person using AI may replace you. So thinking about our students and the fact that they may well be moving into the world of science communication employment, where AI is very much part and parcel of what they do. An open question to any of our speakers: what are there any kind of core skills in AI that we should really be teaching our students now? And one thing in particular that intrigues me in that is whether, because I'm hearing a lot about prompts for AI and what we know about how to, give effective commands to AI. Are there any kind of common skills around that we could perhaps teach? But yeah, any thoughts about teaching and skills and AI that we could perhaps use to sort of future-proof our students moving into this world of work now? Then any ideas would be welcome.
I can go, but I don't want to dominate this
No, that'd be great.
Q&A. Okay, well, when it comes to prompting, something I learned is that a 2-line prompt will most likely lead to an average result, especially when it comes to writing. So imagine ChatGPT to write something. If you want a high-quality result, your prompt should be 200 words, something like that, and give quite a bit of context about the objectives, the boundaries, like the rules, the style, the tone, who you are. Give also a role to the AI. So let's say you're a science writer with 10 years of experience. You can tell that to the AI. And the best, somebody explained it really well to me. It said the AI knows everything. And that's a double-edged sword, because it can get confused. By giving a detailed prompt that tells them you're a science writer, the AI switches off all the unnecessary parts of its knowledge and focuses on that aspect. I think that's a good analogy to use to teach this. I definitely use it myself. So yeah, a good prompt, it's a detailed prompt and covers lots of aspects, gives a role, an objective, and clear rules.
if I could follow up on Tulio's comment, I really liked what you said about creating that 200-word prompt, because it, as a writer and likely as as a student, it really forces you to define exactly what you want. So you're almost creating like a focus statement of what you want. So as a writer, that's an act of discipline, right? So there's validity to do that, even though you're using AI to flesh it out.
Yes, and since writing a 200 words prompt takes time, you should write your own prompt library. So you do it once and then you recycle them. Let's say for LinkedIn post, you can have that structure and just copy paste it and change the details of every post.
It's an interesting thought, isn't it? It just makes me wonder whether in the future our students, when they graduate, are going to be getting jobs in AI prompt crafting or development, perhaps. So Siddharth, I see I think it's your hand up. So yeah, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I was just wonderful presentations, everyone. Very inspiring to hear all of you. I was just thinking about the role of building criticality in terms of interfacing with AI, because there's a lot of conversation about the internet database being biased and all of those biases creeping up in AI when we're using it. And I've also used AI in teaching science communication. And one of the things I do is to anonymize responses which are written by AI and which are written by students, and sort of critique it in class with my students. And I think that already feels outdated because this was last year and AI models are getting better by the day. And so I think one of those things that would be important to also build upon is critical attitudes of criticality in terms of accessing or using AI. And a lot of these examples actually came out in all of the presentations. So I just wanted to know what are your thoughts on that, and how do we sort of train AI better and push it in the right direction? Because there's no putting the genie back in the bottle, but I suppose we could guide it to move in the right direction. Sorry if that wasn't the question, it's more for comment, but yeah.
Do any of the speakers, we've just got a minute or so to go, but do any of the speakers have any thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Make more podcasts.
Terrific. Yeah,
Stories of science.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you, Xavi. And maybe this is a good point to wrap up. And I think Siddharth's point perhaps kind of moves us on to the next session that we have lined up in this sort of short series on science communication, teaching, and AI, because we're going to be reconvening in September, on September the 4th. And we're going to be looking at the sort of ethical and social issues presented by AI. So some of the sort of wider context that we've not had too much opportunity to touch on today. And that session is going to be hosted by Dr. Melanie Smallman. And also just to mention that when Melanie, Franz and myself discuss the theme, we felt that this may well be something that we would want to pick up at the PCST conference that's taking place in Aberdeen next year. So if you have any sort of thoughts about AI and teaching, hold those thoughts, because perhaps there's a group of us who could kind of get our heads together and organise some sessions for a theme at the conference next year as well. A final thanks to me, firstly, to all of the speakers that we've heard today. I think they've provided some fantastic insights. I don't know about you, but I've been making frantic notes, and it's given me a lot of thought for next year's science communication teaching. But also thanks to Franz van Dam as well, who's done a lot of the organisation of this session in the background. It's fair to say couldn't have done it without him. So thank you for that. Thanks for that so much, Franz. But let's wrap up now. Thank you for so many of you attending, for such fantastic questions. And yeah, hopefully let's continue the conversation.
And thank you, Andy, for your wonderful chairmanship. And also thank you, Siddharth, for your technical moderation. So thanks again, and thanks to the speakers. And I hope to see you in next webinar, and perhaps even in Aberdeen. So if you're interested, send us an email. if you want to think along. Yeah, thank you all.